Welcome to CalmNest Stories, where soothing stories and gentle rain help you drift into restful sleep. Tonight, we return to the rainy day bakery, a place of warm lights, comforting scents, and the soft presence of friendly cats. Let the gentle patter of rain on the window and the aroma of fresh baking ease away the worries of your day. As the morning unfolds, the bakery's gentle rhythm continues. The rain outside ebbs and flows, sometimes a soft whisper, sometimes a gentle drumbeat on the roof. Inside, the air is warm and fragrant, the comforting sense of pumpkin, spice, and fresh coffee mingling in every corner. Sarah takes a moment to gaze out at the street, watching as passers-by hurry along beneath their umbrellas, their footsteps splashing through shallow puddles. Some pause at the bakery window, drawn in by the golden glow and the promise of warmth within. She smiles, knowing that soon they too will be welcomed by the scent of baking and the soft sound of laughter. She checks on Oliver, who is now fast asleep, paws tucked under his chin, his breathing slow and steady. The sight of her peaceful companion brings Sarah a quiet sense of joy. She tiptoes back to the kitchen, careful not to disturb him, and begins preparing another batch of pie crust, humming a soft tune as she works. The bell above the door jingles again, and this time, it's a young couple seeking shelter from the rain. Their cheeks are flushed, and they shake droplets from their coats as they enter, instantly enveloped by the bakery's warmth. "Welcome," Sarah greets them, her voice gentle. "Would you like some pumpkin pie and coffee to warm you up?" They nod eagerly, settling at a small table near the window. Sarah serves them generous slices of pie, the filling still slightly warm, and pours 2 steaming mugs of coffee. The couple's eyes light up with gratitude as they take their first bites, savoring the comforting flavors dot around them. The bakery's regulars chat softly, their voices blending with the rain and the occasional clink of cutlery. An elderly man reads his newspaper, pausing now and then to enjoy his pie. A mother and her young daughter share a plate of cookies, giggling quietly as they watch Oliver twitch in his sleep. Sarah moves through the bakery, refilling cups and sharing kind words. She feels a deep sense of contentment, knowing that her little shop is a haven from the storm, a place where people can find warmth, kindness, and a moment of peace. As the morning gives way to afternoon, the rain continues its steady song. The bakery remains a sanctuary, its windows fogged with warmth, its tables filled with friends and neighbors. And through it all, the scent of pumpkin pie and fresh coffee lingers, wrapping everyone in a gentle, reassuring embrace. Soon, Sarah will close up for the day, but for now, she allows herself to simply be present, to savor the simple joys of baking, sharing, and being part of this small, cherished community. She stands behind the counter for a moment, hands wrapped around her mug, feeling the gentle heat seep into her palms. The light outside has softened to a gentle silver, the rain still falling in a steady, soothing rhythm. Through the bakery's fogged windows, the world seems distant and dreamlike, a watercolor painting of umbrellas and glistening cobblestones. Inside, the bakery glows with a golden warmth. The last few customers linger, their voices low and content, sharing stories and laughter over the remains of their pie. The young couple by the window sits close together, their hands entwined around a single mug of coffee, their smiles soft and peaceful. Mrs. Ellery gently folds her newspaper, her eyes shining with quiet gratitude as she waves goodbye to Sarah. On her way out into the misty evening, Sarah moves through her little shop, tidying up with slow, mindful movements. She wipes down the tables, her cloth gliding over the woods. Familiar grain. She stacks the empty plates and cups, the gentle clink a comforting sound in the quiet room. Every so often, she pauses to look around, her heart full of appreciation for these simple, everyday moments. Oliver, now awake, stretches luxuriously and leaps onto a stool, watching Sarah with sleepy, contented eyes. She gives him a gentle scratch behind the ears, smiling as he purrs in response. The bakery feels even cozier as dusk settles outside, the rain's melody growing softer, almost like a lullaby. Sarah lights a few small candles along the windowsill, their flames flickering gently and casting playful shadows on the walls. The scent of pumpkin and spice still lingers in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of melting wax and rain-soaked earth. She takes a seat at her favorite table, the one nearest the window, and gazes out at the quiet street. For a moment, she allows herself to simply breathe, to listen to the rain, and to feel the deep contentment that comes from a day well spent. She thinks of all the smiles she's seen, the stories she's heard, and the comfort she's shared all. The tiny threads that weave her bakery into the fabric of the neighborhood as she sits. She traces her finger along the edge of her empty coffee cup, feeling the smoothness of the porcelain. The gentle tap of raindrops against the glass seems to echo the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. She watches as the streetlights flicker on, their golden halos reflected in the puddles below, casting a soft glow on the wet cobblestones. Sarah's thoughts wander to the regulars who fill her days with laughter and kindness. She remembers the shy smile of the young woman who comes in every Thursday for a slice of pie and a quiet hour with her book. She recalls the boisterous group of friends who gather at the big table near the back, their cheerful banter filling the room with warmth. She thinks of the elderly gentleman who always brings a crossword puzzle and leaves a folded newspaper behind for the next customer to enjoy. Each person, she realizes, brings something special to the Beccaria story, a memory, a gentle presence. Even the briefest encounters, a polite nod or a shared smile, add to the tapestry of comfort that fills this little space. Sarah feels a quiet pride knowing that her bakery is more than just a place to buy bread and pastries. It's a haven, a gathering place, a home away from home for so many. She glances at Oliver, who is curled up once again by the window, his tail wrapped neatly around his paws. He watches the world outside with half-closed eyes, perfectly content. In the warmth and safety of the bakery, Sarah smiles, feeling a kinship with her sleepy companion. Like Oliver, she is grateful for the shelter, the gentle light, and the peaceful routine of her days. The bakery is nearly silent now, save for the rain and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Sarah lets her mind drift, remembering the first day she opened her doors, how nervous and hopeful she had felt. Over time, the bakery had grown into something more than she ever imagined, a place where people found solace, connection, and joy, even on the rainiest days. She remembers the early morning of that first day, when the world outside was still dark and the air inside was thick with anticipation. She had arrived before dawn, her arms filled with sacks of flour and baskets of eggs, her heart fluttering with excitement and uncertainty. The bakery had felt so big then, the empty tables and bare shelves echoing with possibility. She'd spent hours arranging pastries in the display case, lining up loaves of bread, and wiping down every surface until it gleamed. As the sun rose, Sarah had stood behind the counter, hands trembling slightly, waiting for her first customer. She remembers the sound of the bell above the door, the way her heart leaped as a neighbor stepped inside, drawn by the scent of fresh bread and cinnamon. There had been a shy smile, a few kind words, and the exchange of warm pastries for coins. That simple moment, her first sale, had filled her with a quiet pride and a sense of belonging. In the months that followed, the bakery became a living thing, shaped by the people who passed through its doors. Sarah learned the favorite treats of her regulars, the way Mrs. Ellery liked her scones, just barely sweetened, how Mr. Patel preferred his coffee strong and his croissants flaky, the special cookies that Emma, the little girl with bright red boots, always asked for after school. She learned to recognize the subtle signs of someone needing comfort, a hesitant glance. A tired side found joy in offering an extra smile or a warm cup of tea. The walls of the bakery, once bare, slowly filled with memories. There were hand-drawn thank you cards from children pinned up by the register, photographs of local events with smiling faces and flower-dusted aprons hung in a cheerful collage near the door. On the windowsill, a row of potted herbs grew lush and fragrant, gifts from customers who had become friends. Sarah thinks of the countless mornings spent kneading dough, the rhythm of her hands working flour and water into something soft and alive. She remembers the afternoons when sunlight streamed through the windows, casting golden patterns on the floor as she rolled out pastry and sprinkled cinnamon on apples. She recalls the evenings when the bakery glowed with candlelight, the tables filled with neighbors sharing stories and laughter over slices of cake and steaming mugs of cocoa. She smiles softly, recalling the quiet moments, to the peaceful hush that settles over the bakery after the last customer has gone, when she can hear the gentle ticking of the clock and the rain's steady song. In those moments, she feels a deep sense of gratitude for the life she has built, for the simple joys and the unexpected blessings. Her gaze drifts to the little chalkboard on the wall, where she writes the day's specials each morning. Over time, the board has become more than just a menu. It's a space for messages, jokes, and words of encouragement. Sometimes, customers leave notes for one another, birthday wish, a thank you, or a reminder to try the new lemon tart. These small acts of kindness, Sarah knows, are the true heart of her bakery. She thinks of the friendships that have blossomed here, the quiet support offered over cups of tea, the celebrations and sorrows shared at her tables. She remembers the winter when a heavy snowstorm closed the roads and the bakery became a refuge for neighbors stranded far from home. That night, they gathered around the oven, sharing stories and singing songs as Sarah baked extra loaves of bread to keep everyone warm and fed. The memory brings a gentle warmth to her chest, a reminder of the strength and resilience of her community. As the rain continues to fall outside, Sarah lets her thoughts wander to the future. She imagines new faces at her tables, new recipes to try, and new memories waiting to be made. She dreams of teaching baking classes to children, of hosting poetry nights and holiday feasts, of finding new ways to bring people together in her little shop. For now, though, she is content to sit, quietly savoring the peace of the moment. She listens to the rain, steady and soothing, and watches as the streetlights cast shimmering reflections on the wet pavement. The world outside is calm and still, wrapped in the gentle embrace of night. Oliver, her loyal companion, stirs from his spot by the window and pads over to her side. He leaps gracefully onto her lap, curling into a warm, purring ball. Sarah strokes his soft fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. and smiles at the simple comfort of his presence. She glances around the bakery, taking in the familiar sights: the rows of jars filled with sugar and spices, the baskets of fresh bread, the delicate pastries lined up in the display case. Each item tells a story, a testament to the care and love she pours into her work. The bakery is more than just a place of business. It is an extension of her heart, a space where she can share her passion and creativity with others. Sarah stands and moves to the kitchen, her footsteps quiet on the worn wooden floor. She begins to tidy up, washing dishes and wiping down counters, her movements slow and unhurried. She hums a soft tune, the melody blending with the rain and the ticking clock. The simple tasks bring her a sense of calm, a gentle way to close the day. As she finishes her chores, Sarah lights a final candle on the counter, its flame flickering gently in the dim light. She pours herself a small cup of tea, the steam curling up in delicate tendrils, and returns to her seat by the window. She cradles the cup in her hands, savoring the warmth and the subtle flavor of chamomile and honey. Outside, the rain begins to ease, the droplets growing lighter and more sporadic. The clouds part just enough to reveal a sliver of moon, its pale light casting a silvery glow over the quiet street. Sarah watches as the world settles into stillness, the last echoes of the day fading into the soft hush of night. She thinks of all the people who have found comfort within these walls: weary travelers, the lonely souls seeking company, the friends and families celebrating life's milestones. She feels a deep sense of purpose, knowing that her bakery is a place of refuge and joy, a small beacon of light on even the darkest days. As the clock chimes softly, signaling the end of another day, Sarah rises and makes her way to the door. She locks up, drawing the curtains and turning off the lights, leaving only the gentle glow of the candles to illuminate the room. She whispers a quiet goodnight to the bakery, to Oliver, and to the memories that fill the space. Stepping outside, Sarah breathes in the cool, rain-washed air. She listens to the distant sound of water trickling through the gutters, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. The world is peaceful, wrapped in the gentle arms of night. She walks home beneath the shelter of her umbrella, her heart full and content. She knows that tomorrow will bring new challenges and joys, new faces and stories, new opportunities to share the simple magic of baking and community. But for now, she is grateful for this moment, for the quiet beauty of a day well spent, and for the promise of rest and renewal. As she drifts off to sleep that night, Sarah carries with her the gentle rhythms of the bakery, the warmth of the oven, the laughter of friends, the steady song of the rain. She dreams of golden loaves and cinnamon rolls, of steaming cups of coffee and the soft glow of candlelight. And in her dreams, the bakery is always there, place of comfort, connection, and endless possibility. And as you listen, let yourself be carried by these peaceful images. Imagine the warmth of the bakery, the gentle patter of rain, and the deep contentment that comes from being part of something cherished and good. Allow the calm to settle over you and drift gently into a restful, restorative sleep, knowing that you, too, are part of this story, a thread in the tapestry of kindness and community woven together by simple joys and shared moments. Outside, the wind howled through the narrow streets, rattling the window panes and sending leaves swirling in wild, colorful eddies. The sky was a patchwork of deep grey clouds, heavy with the promise of rain. It was the kind of day that made people pull their scarves tighter, tuck their chins into their collars, and hurry along the cobblestone sidewalks, eager for the shelter of home. But inside the rainy day bakery, all was warmth and comfort. The golden glow of lamplight spilled across the polished wooden floors, and the air was thick with the scent of cinnamon, butter, and sweet apples. The bakery was a refuge from the blustery world outside, a place where time seemed to slow, and worries melted away like sugar in tea. Margaret, the baker, stood at her work table near the window, her cheeks rosy from the warmth of the oven and the pleasure of her work. She wore a soft blue apron, its pockets filled with wooden spoons and a faded handkerchief. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, a few wisps escaping to frame her gentle face. She glanced outside, watching as the wind tugged at the branches of the old oak tree across the street. The rain had not yet begun, but the clouds pressed low, promising a downpour before long. Margaret smiled to herself. There was something magical about baking on a day like this, when the world outside was wild and restless, but inside everything was safe and serene. On the counter before her sat a wooden crate brimming with apples bright red and golden, their skins shining in the lamplight. Margaret ran her hands over the fruit, feeling the cool, smooth surfaces beneath her fingers. She had chosen these apples carefully at the morning market, selecting each one for its crispness and sweet aroma. Now they would become the centerpiece of her afternoon's baking, baked apples, filled with brown sugar, butter, and spices. She selected the largest apple from the crate and placed it on her cutting board. With a practiced hand, she cored it, creating a hollow center just big enough for a spoonful of filling. The apple's flesh was firm and fragrant, releasing a burst of sweetness into the air. She repeated the process with 3 more apples, lining them up in a row like little red lanterns. Margaret reached for her favorite mixing bowl, a deep ceramic vessel painted with blue flowers. Into it, she scooped soft brown sugar, a generous pat of butter, and a sprinkle of cinnamon and nutmeg. She added a handful of chopped walnuts and a few plump raisins for extra sweetness. Using a wooden spoon, she mixed the ingredients together, the butter melting into the sugar to form a rich, fragrant paste. She filled each apple with the mixture, pressing it gently into the hollowed centers until they were brimming with sweet, spiced goodness. She placed the apples in a baking dish and poured a little apple cider around them, just enough to keep them moist as they baked. Finally, she dusted the tops with a pinch of cinnamon and slid the dish into the waiting oven. The kitchen filled with the sound of the oven door closing, followed by the soft tick of the timer. Margaret wiped her hands on her apron and leaned against the counter, savoring the anticipation. Already, the scent of baking apples began to mingle with the other aromas in the bakery, creating a symphony of warmth and comfort. She moved to the front of the shop, where a few customers lingered over their afternoon tea. At a corner table, Mrs. Abernathy read her favorite mystery novel, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. Near the window, a pair of friends shared a plate of scones, their laughter bubbling up like the kettle on the stove. A young boy and his mother sat at the counter, watching the rain clouds gather and sipping mugs of steaming cocoa. Margaret greeted each of them with a smile, refilling teapots and offering extra napkins. She loved these quiet afternoons, when the bakery became a haven from the storm, and people found comfort in simple pleasures, a warm drink, a sweet treat, a kind word as she poured herself a cup of tea and settled at a small table. The wind outside picked up, rattling the sign that hung above the bakery door. The first drops of rain began to fall, tapping softly against the glass. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the gentle rhythm. There was something soothing about the sound of rain, especially when paired with the cozy bustle of the bakery. She sipped her tea and let her mind wander. She thought of her grandmother, who had taught her to bake on days just like this, when the world outside was wild and grey, but the kitchen was a place of warmth and magic. She remembered the feel of her grandmother's hands guiding hers, the laughter they shared as flour dusted their noses, the stories told as dough rose and pies baked. Margaret smiled at the memory, feeling her grandmother's presence in every corner of the bakery. She glanced at the old recipe book on the shelf, its pages worn and stained from years of use. The recipe for baked apples was written in her grandmother's careful script. A little note in the margin reading, "Best enjoyed on a rainy day." Margaret had followed that advice ever since, finding comfort in the ritual and the connection to her past. The timer chimed softly, pulling her from her reverie. Margaret rose and returned to the kitchen, the air now thick with the scent of caramelized sugar and spices. She opened the oven, and a wave of warmth washed over her, carrying with it the promise of something wonderful. The apples were perfectly baked, their skins wrinkled and glossy, the filling bubbling up in golden rivulets. Margaret used a spoon to carefully lift them onto a platter, drizzling the pan juices over the top. She garnished each apple with a sprinkle of chopped walnuts and a dollop of whipped cream. The final touch to a perfect treat. She carried the platter to the front of the shop, the aroma drawing the attention of her customers. Mrs. Abernathy looked up from her book, her eyes lighting up with delight. The friends near the window paused their conversation, smiling in anticipation. The young boy at the counter tugged at his mother's sleeve, his face alight with excitement. Margaret offered each of them a baked apple, watching as their faces softened with pleasure at the first bite. The apples were tender and sweet, the filling rich and fragrant, the cream cool and light. The bakery filled with the quiet sounds of contentment, the clink of spoons, the sighs of satisfaction, the gentle murmur of conversation as the rain fell harder outside. The bakery became a world unto itself, a place where time slowed, and the storm was kept at bay by warmth, kindness, and the simple magic of homemade treats. Margaret poured herself another cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the rain trace patterns down the glass. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that she had created a haven for her neighbors, place where they could find comfort and joy. Even on the blusteriest of days, she watched as the wind whipped the branches of the old oak tree, sending showers of leaves dancing through the air. The streetlights flickered on, casting golden halos on the wet pavement. Inside, the bakery glowed with lamplight and laughter, a beacon of warmth in the gathering dusk. Margaret thought of the stories unfolding around her, the mysteries in Mrs. Abernathy's book, the laughter shared between friends, the quiet bond between mother and son. She felt honored to be a part of these moments, to offer a little sweetness and comfort in a world that could sometimes feel cold and uncertain. As the afternoon faded into evening, the rain softened to a gentle patter, and the wind grew still. One by one, the customers gathered their things and prepared to leave, each pausing to thank Margaret for the delicious apples and the cozy refuge of her bakery. Mrs. Abernathy tucked her book into her bag and smiled. "You know, Margaret, there's nothing better than baked apples on a day like this. Your grandmother would be proud." Margaret's heart swelled with gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. I think she'd be happy to see us all together, finding comfort in her recipes." The friends by the window donned their coats, their cheeks rosy from laughter and warmth. The young boy hugged his mother, his face still sticky with apple and cream. They all stepped out into the fading rain, their spirits lifted by the simple joys of the afternoon. Margaret watched them go, her hand resting lightly on the back of a chair. For a moment, she simply stood in the hush that followed, listening to the soft hush of the rain and the distant call of a black bird settling in for the night. The bakery felt even cozier now, the golden lamplight glowing against the deepening dusk, the air scented with lingering apples and spice. She moved through the bakery, clearing plates and cups, stacking them in neat piles behind the counter. Each dish carried a story, a shared joke, a quiet moment, a memory made. Margaret took her time, savoring the gentle rhythm of her work. She wiped down the tables, her cloth moving in slow circles, and swept the floor, gathering the day's crumbs and laughter into her despan. As she worked, she hummed a tune her grandmother used to sing, the melody winding through the quiet like a gentle breeze. She thought of her grandmother's kitchen, how it always seemed to glow with warmth. Even on the stormiest days, there had been a big wooden table, scarred by years of use, and shelves lined with jars of preserves and spices. Margaret could almost hear her grandmother's voice, soft and steady, guiding her through each recipe, teaching her the magic of patience and care. When the last table was cleaned and the floor swept, Margaret turned her attention to the kitchen. She washed the mixing bowls and wooden spoons, the water warm on her hands, the soap bubbles sparkling in the lamplight. She dried each dish with a soft towel, stacking them neatly on the shelf. The kitchen, too, held memories of early mornings spent kneading dough, of laughter shared over spilled flour, of quiet evenings spent planning the next day's treats. Margaret paused by the window, looking out at the rain-slicked street. The clouds had begun to break apart, revealing streaks of pale blue and the first glimmer of stars. The bakery's sign swung gently in the breeze, its painted letters gleaming in the lamplight. Across the street, the old oak tree stood tall and steady, its branches sheltering a pair of sparrows from the last drops of rain. She felt a deep sense of peace settle over her, as though the world itself were sighing with contentment. The storm had passed, leaving behind a freshness in the air and a sense of possibility. Margaret smiled, grateful for the quiet beauty of the evening. She lit a few candles, their flames flickering gently and casting playful shadows on the walls. The bakery glowed even more warmly now, the lights soft and inviting. Margaret poured herself a cup of chamomile tea and carried it to her favorite table by the window. She sat down, cradling the mug in her hands, and let herself simply be present, peaceful and at home. Outside, the village was settling in for the night. Lights flickered on in the windows of nearby houses, casting golden pools on the wet pavement. A cat slipped silently along the fence, its tail held high. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour, its notes drifting through the evening air. Margaret sipped her tea and gazed out at the quiet street. She thought of all the people who had passed through her bakery that day, each carrying their own stories and dreams. She imagined Mrs. Abernathy curled up in her armchair, lost in the pages of her mystery novel, the taste of baked apple lingering on her tongue. She pictured the friends gathered around a kitchen table, their laughter echoing through the house as they shared memories of the afternoon. She saw the young boy tucked into bed, his mother reading him a story, the comfort of the bakery still warm in his heart as she sat. Margaret's thoughts drifted to her own childhood. She remembered blustery days spent in her grandmother's kitchen, the windows fogged with steam, the air thick with the scent of baking. She remembered the thrill of helping to core apples, her small hands sticky with juice, her grandmother's laughter ringing out as she tried to sneak a taste of the filling. Those afternoons had felt endless, filled with love and warmth and the promise of something sweet. Margaret smiled, feeling the thread of connection stretching through the years. She wondered if, someday, a child would sit in her bakery and remember the taste of baked apples, the sound of rain on the windows, the gentle hum of her voice. Perhaps, she thought, that was the true magic of baking, not just the recipes, but the memories woven into each bite, the comfort shared across generations. The tea warmed her from the inside out, soothing and fragrant. She closed her eyes and listened to the quieter, gentle symphony of rain, wind, and distant laughter. The bakery felt like a cocoon, safe and snug, a world apart from the rush and noise outside. After a while, Margaret rose and began to prepare for closing. She checked the ovens, making sure they were off, and covered the remaining pastries with clean cloths. She set out a bowl of water and a small saucer of cream for the neighborhood cat, who sometimes slipped in through the back door for a midnight treat. She tidied the counter, arranging the jars and canisters just so, and made a list of ingredients to order for the next day. When everything was in its place, Margaret slipped on her coat and wrapped a scarf around her neck. She blew out the candles, one by one, watching the flames flicker and fade. The bakery grew dim, the last light coming from the street lamp outside. Margaret paused at the door, her hand on the old brass handle. She looked back at the bakery, her heart full of gratitude. She whispered a quiet goodnight to the room, to the memories it held, and to the promise of another day. Stepping outside, Margaret breathed in the cool, rain-washed air. The village was quiet now, the only sounds the gentle drip of water from the eaves and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. The sky was clearing, stars beginning to appear, their light reflected in the puddles on the street. Margaret walked slowly, savoring the peace of the evening. She passed the old oak tree, its leaves glistening with rain, and waved to a neighbor closing up his shop across the way. The houses she passed glowed with lamplight, their windows framed by curtains and flower boxes. In one, she saw a family gathered around a table, their faces lit by laughter and candlelight. In another, a woman sat by the fire, knitting a scarf, as a dog dozed at her feet. As she walked, Margaret thought about the day to come. She imagined the bakery filled with the scent of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls, the tables crowded with neighbors and friends. She thought of new recipes to try, perhaps a spiced pear tart or a batch of gingerbread cookies. She wondered what stories would unfold, what laughter would echo through the room, what memories would be made. When she reached her cottage at the edge of the village, Margaret paused to look back at the bakery. Its windows were dark now, but she could still feel the warmth within, the glow of kindness and community. She unlocked her door and stepped inside, greeted by the familiar creak of the floorboards and the soft meow of her cat. Willow wound herself around Margaret's ankles, purring contentedly. Margaret scooped her up, pressing a kiss to her soft fur, and carried her into the kitchen. She set Willow down on a chair and filled her bowl with cream, smiling as the cat lapped it up with delicate enthusiasm. Margaret changed into her slippers and lit a fire in the hearth, the flames crackling and dancing in the grate. She curled up in her favorite armchair, a thick blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and opened the book she had been reading, a collection of letters from bakers around the world, each sharing their own stories and traditions. As she read, Margaret felt a sense of kinship with these distant bakers. She imagined their kitchens filled with the same sense of flour and spice, their hands moving through the same familiar motions. She pictured the people who gathered in their shops, seeking comfort and connection, just as her own neighbors did. The fire warmed the room, casting a gentle glow on the walls. Willow leaped onto Margaret's lap, kneading the blanket with her paws before curling into a tight ball. Margaret stroked her soft fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breath, the quiet reassurance of her presence. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the world fresh and clean. The wind had died down, and the only sound was the occasional drip of water from the eaves. The moon rose high in the sky, its light silvering the rooftops and turning the garden into a world of shadows and dreams. Margaret closed her book and leaned back in her chair, letting her thoughts drift. She thought of her grandmother, of the lessons learned in a flour-dusted kitchen, of the love and laughter that filled her days. She thought of the bakery, of the people who found comfort there, of the stories shared over cups of tea and slices of cake. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life she had built, for the simple joys and the unexpected blessings. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys, new faces and stories, new opportunities to share the magic of baking and community. As she drifted off to sleep, Margaret carried with her the gentle rhythms of the day, the warmth of the oven, the laughter of friends, the steady song of the rain. She dreamed of golden loaves and cinnamon rolls, of steaming cups of coffee and the soft glow of candlelight. And in her dreams, the bakery was always their place of comfort, connection, and endless possibility. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the storm a memory, the world washed clean and sparkling. Margaret woke to the sound of birdsong and the soft light of the sun streaming through her window. She stretched and yawned, Willow purring beside her, and slipped out of bed. She dressed quickly, pulling on her favorite apron, and made her way to the kitchen. She brewed a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the air, and toasted a slice of bread spread with homemade apple butter. She ate her breakfast at the little table by the window, watching the village come to life. Neighbors stepped out onto their porches, waving to one another, their faces bright with the promise of a new day. Margaret finished her coffee and gathered her things for the bakery. She packed a basket with fresh apples and a jar of honey, a gift from a friend who kept bees in the meadow beyond the village. She tucked a sprig of rosemary into her pocket, its scent sharp and clean, and set out for the bakery. The air was crisp and fresh, the sky a brilliant blue. The village was bustling with activity, children skipping along the sidewalks, shopkeepers sweeping their stoops, dogs barking and chasing after sticks. Margaret greeted each neighbor with a smile, exchanging cheerful words and laughter. When she reached the bakery, she unlocked the door and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of flour and spice. She opened the windows, letting in the fresh morning air, and set to work preparing the day's treats. She kneaded dough for bread, her hands moving with practiced ease, and rolled out pastry for tarts and pies. She sliced apples and pears, sprinkling them with cinnamon and sugar, and arranged them in neat rows on baking sheets. She whipped cream and melted chocolate, filled jars with jam and honey, and set out trays of cookies and scones. As the morning wore on, the bakery filled with the sounds of live customers chatting over coffee, children giggling as they chose their favorite treats, the bell above the door ringing with each new arrival. Margaret moved among them, offering smiles and kind words, sharing recipes and stories. She watched as the village came together in her little shop, neighbors greeting one another, friends catching up over tea, strangers becoming friends over shared slices of cake. She felt the magic of community, the warmth of connection, the simple joy of being part of something larger than herself. The day passed in a blur of laughter and light, the bakery a hub of activity and happiness. Margaret found herself singing as she worked, her voice blending with the hum of conversation and the clatter of dishes. She felt a deep sense of purpose, knowing that she was offering more than just food. She was offering comfort, kindness, and a place to belong. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the village, Margaret paused to catch her breath. She looked around the bakery, at the tables crowded with friends and families, at the shelves lined with fresh bread and pastries, at the windows glowing with golden light. She felt a deep sense of contentment, knowing that she had found her place in the world. She thought of her grandmother, of the lessons learned in a flour-dusted kitchen, of the love and laughter that filled her days. She knew that the magic of baking was not just in the recipes, but in the memories made, the connections forged, the comfort shared as the last customers left. Margaret tidied up the bakery, wiping down tables and washing dishes, her heart full of gratitude. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the stars appear in the night sky. She thought of the day just past, of the stories shared and the laughter echoed through the room. She thought of the days to come, of the new memories waiting to be made, of the endless possibilities that each new morning would bring. And as she sat in the quiet of the bakery, surrounded by the warmth of home and the promise of tomorrow, Margaret knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be, at the heart of her village, offering comfort and joy, one baked apple at a time. The rain had begun early that morning, a soft, steady patter that turned the cobblestone streets into glistening ribbons and painted the shop windows with gentle streaks. Inside the rainy day bakery, the world felt a world apart, warm, golden, and filled with the kind of comforting sense that made you want to linger just a little longer. Sarah, the baker, stood at the wide wooden counter, her hands dusted with flour and her apron tied snugly around her waist. She glanced out the window, watching as umbrellas bobbed past and puddles grew in the dips of the lane. The bakery's sign, painted with a cheerful loaf and a steaming mug, swung lightly in the breeze. Today was a special day. It was the day of the cookie club, a gathering of friends, neighbors, and cookie enthusiasts who came together once a month to bake, share, and savor their favorite treats. Each meeting was a little different. Sometimes they focused on a single recipe, other times they experimented with new flavors. But today, Sarah had proposed a challenge. Together they would try to create the perfect batch of cookies. She smiled as she remembered the excited chatter from the last meeting. "What is the perfect cookie?" Mrs. Patel had asked, her eyes twinkling. "Is it chewy or crisp? Chocolatey or spiced? With nuts or without?" The group had laughed, each person insisting their favorite was the best, but all agreeing that the only way to find out was to bake together and see. Sarah moved through the bakery, preparing for the afternoon ahead. She set out bowls and spoons, measuring cups and spatulas, and lined trays with fresh parchment paper. She filled glass jars with chocolate chips, walnuts, pecans, dried cherries, and golden raisins. She arranged canisters of flour, sugar, brown sugar, and oats on the counter, their contents promising endless possibilities. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah looked up to see Mrs. Abernathy arriving, her raincoat a cheerful shade of yellow and her arms full of cookbooks. "I brought my grandmother's recipe for ginger snaps," she announced, setting the books on a table near the window. "They're a bit spicy, but they'll warm you right up." Next came Mr. Patel, carrying a tin of cardamom pods and a jar of honey from his garden. "My mother used to make honey cardamom cookies for special occasions," he said, his voice soft with memory. "Perhaps we can add a little of this to the mix." Emma and her twin brother, Max, burst through the door a moment later, their boots splattered with rain and their cheeks flushed with excitement. "We want to make double chocolate chip," Emma declared, holding up a bag of cocoa powder. Max nodded in agreement, already eyeing the chocolate chips on the counter. One by one, the rest of the cookie club arrived. Mrs. Lynn with her famous almond cookies, young Sophie with a jar of homemade orange marmalade, and Mr. Green, the retired schoolteacher, who claimed he could taste the difference between every type of vanilla extract. Soon, the bakery was filled with the happy noise of friends greeting one another, sharing stories, and debating the merits of crispy versus chewy, nuts versus no nuts, and the importance of chilling the dough. Sarah poured mugs of tea and coffee, passing them around as everyone settled in. "Before we begin," she said, raising her mug in a toast, "let's remember what makes cookies so special. It's not just the ingredients or the recipe, but the memories we share, the laughter, and the love we put into every batch." The group cheered, clinking mugs and nibbling on leftover scones as they gathered around the counter. Sarah handed out aprons, and soon everyone was rolling up their sleeves, ready to begin the great cookie experiment. They started by sharing stories of their favorite cookies. Mrs. Abernathy spoke of snowy afternoons spent baking with her grandmother, the kitchen filled with the scent of ginger and molasses. Mr. Patel recalled Diwali celebrations, the air thick with the aroma of cardamom and honey, the laughter of family echoing through the house. Emma and Max described the thrill of sneaking chocolate chips from the bowl when their mother wasn't looking. And Mrs. Lynn told of New Year's feasts, her almond cookies a symbol of good luck and happiness. Sarah listened, her heart full. She realized that each story was a thread, weaving the group together in a tapestry of memory and tradition. The perfect cookie, she thought, might just be the one that brought everyone together. With the stories shared, it was time to bake. The group divided into teams, each tasked with creating their ideal cookie. Mrs. Abernathy and Mr. Green teamed up to make ginger snaps with a touch of orange zest. Emma, Max, and Sophie set out to create the ultimate double chocolate chip, adding a swirl of marmalade for a twist. Mrs. Lynn and Mr. Patel decided to blend their traditions, making almond cardamom cookies sweetened with honey. Sarah floated between the groups, offering advice and encouragement, her own heart set on finding the perfect balance of chewy and crisp, sweet and spicy. The bakery filled with the sounds of laughter, the clatter of spoons, and the soft thud of dough being dropped onto trays. Flour dusted the air, settling on noses and aprons. Chocolate chips rolled across the counter, chased by eager fingers. The scent of cinnamon and ginger mingled with the rich aroma of melting chocolate, creating a symphony of warmth and comfort. The first trays went into the oven, and everyone gathered around, peering through the glass as the cookies spread and browned. The anticipation was electric, the air thick with the promise of something wonderful. When the timer chimed, Sarah pulled the trays from the oven, the cookies golden and fragrant. The group crowded around, eager to taste the results. Some cookies were crisp at the edges, others soft and chewy. Some were boldly spiced, others rich with chocolate or fragrant with almonds. They tasted, laughed, and shared feedback. "A little more salt," suggested Mr. Green. "Maybe less sugar," said Mrs. Lynn. "More chocolate," cried Max, his face smeared with melted chips. The group agreed to try again, adjusting their recipes, blending ideas, and working together. The second batch was even better, chewier, richer, more balanced. The bakery filled with the scent of success and the sound of celebration. As the afternoon faded into evening, the rain outside softened, and the bakery glowed with lamplight and laughter. Friends lingered over tea, savoring the perfect batch of cookies and the joy of being together. Sarah looked around the room, her heart full. She realized that the perfect cookie wasn't just about taste or texture, but about the memories made, the friendships forged, and the love shared. And as the Cookie Club wrote down their recipe for happiness, promising to gather again, Sarah knew that her bakery was more than just a place to bake. It was a home, a haven, and a place where the simple magic of cookies could bring people together. One perfect batch at a time. The Cookie Club's great cookie experiment, the rain, continued its gentle song against the bakery's windows as the Cookie Club members bustled about, each team immersed in their own cookie-making adventure. Sarah moved from group to group, offering encouragement, answering questions, and occasionally rescuing a wayward chocolate chip from rolling off the counter. The air in the bakery was alive with laughter and the soft clatter of mixing bowls. Mrs. Abernathy and Mr. Green, both seasoned bakers, debated the merits of using dark versus light brown sugar in their ginger snaps. Light brown for subtlety, dark brown for depth, Mrs. Abernathy insisted, her hands deftly measuring sugar into a bowl. Mr. Green, ever the scientist, suggested a blend. "Let's go half and half sometimes. The perfect answer is in the middle." Meanwhile, Emma, Max, and Sophie had already managed to dust themselves and a good portion of the floor with cocoa powder. Their double chocolate chip dough was thick and glossy, and Sophie giggled as she swirled a spoonful of orange marmalade through the mixture. "It looks like a chocolate sunset," she exclaimed, and the others agreed, sneaking tastes when they thought Sarah wasn't looking. At the next table, Mrs. Lynn and Mr. Patel worked quietly but efficiently, their almond cardamom dough coming together with practiced hands. Mrs. Lynn cracked eggs with a single tap, while Mr. Patel ground cardamom pods with a mortar and pestle, releasing a heady floral aroma that mingled with the sweet scent of honey. Sarah herself was experimenting with a new recipe: oatmeal cookies with toasted pecans and plump golden raisins, finished with a sprinkle of flaky sea salt. She loved the way the oats gave the dough a hearty texture, and the pecans added a gentle crunch. As she stirred, she thought about the science and art of cookie baking, how the right balance of flour, fat, sugar, and leavening could yield a cookie that was crisp at the edges and tender in the center, with just the right amount of chew. The children were especially delighted by the sensory experience of baking. Max pressed his hands into the soft, sticky dough, marveling at how it squished between his fingers. Emma sniffed the vanilla extract, her eyes closing in delight. Sophie, ever curious, asked to taste the raw dough, and Sarah smiled, remembering her own childhood impatience for the finished product. "Baking is about all your senses," Sarah told them. "You see the color of the dough, feel its texture, smell the spices, hear the mixer worry, and of course, taste the results. Every batch is a little different, and that's part of the fun." And as the last crumbs were swept from the counter and the Cookie Club promised to meet again, Sarah felt a deep sense of contentment, knowing that in her bakery, on a rainy afternoon, They had found something truly special together. Evening. In the bakery, Cookie Club's heartfelt moments as the second batch of cookies cooled on wire racks. The bakery's atmosphere grew even more inviting. The rain outside had softened to a gentle drizzle, and the golden lamplight reflected off the bakery windows, casting a warm glow on the faces of everyone gathered inside. The hum of conversation and the occasional burst of laughter filled the air, blending with the comforting sense of sugar, spice, and melting chocolate. Sarah took a moment to step back and observe the scene. She saw Mrs. Abernathy and Mr. Green, still deep in discussion, now comparing the merits of different vanillas bourbon versus Tahitian while nibbling thoughtfully on their ginger snaps. Emma and Max, cheeks smudged with cocoa, were busy arranging their double chocolate cookies in a spiral on a serving platter, taking great pride in their work. Sophie, ever the artist, had used a fork to press a crisscross pattern into the almond cardamom cookies, giving them a rustic, homemade look. The bakery itself was a feast for the senses. Trays of cookies, some golden and crisp, others soft and pillowy, lined the counters. The stainless steel of the prep area gleamed beneath the lights, and the cookie jars and canisters caught the glow, making the whole room feel like a treasure trove of sweet possibilities. The air was thick with the scent of yeasty dough, toasted nuts, and the unmistakable aroma of fresh coffee brewing in the corner. Sarah knew that part of the magic of baking was in the details, the way flour dusted the counters like a light snowfall, the feel of warm trays beneath a kitchen towel, the sticky sweetness of dough clinging to fingertips. She watched as Mrs. Lynn carefully brushed crumbs from the edge of a plate, and as Mr. Patel poured tea, his hands steady and practiced as the cookies cooled. The group gathered around the largest table, mugs of tea and coffee in hand. The rain provided a gentle soundtrack, and the bakery felt like a safe harbor from the world outside. Sarah invited everyone to share a story about their favorite cookie memory, and the room grew quiet as each person took a turn. Mrs. Abernathy spoke first, her voice soft but clear. "When I was a little girl, my grandmother would bake ginger snaps every Sunday. She always let me help, even if I made a mess. The kitchen would be filled with the smell of spices, and we'd eat the cookies warm from the oven, sitting by the fire. To this day, a ginger snap takes me right back to those afternoons, safe, loved, and home." Mr. Patel smiled, nodding. "For me, it's honey cardamom biscuits. My mother would make them for Diwali, and the whole house would smell sweet and floral. She'd let me shape the dough, and I'd always sneak a taste before they went in the oven. Those biscuits meant celebration and family." Emma and Max, always eager, jumped in together. "We love making cookies with our mum. She lets us choose the mix-ins, and sometimes we make faces with chocolate chips and raisins. The best part is licking the spoon," Emma added, and everyone laughed in agreement. Mrs. Lynn shared a memory of baking almond cookies for Lunar New Year, the delicate scent of almonds filling her family's apartment. We'd give them to neighbors and friends, wishing them luck and happiness for the year ahead. It was a way to share joy. Sophie, a bit shy, spoke quietly. "I like baking with my dad. We make peanut butter cookies and try to make each one look like a little animal. Sometimes they turn out funny, but we always laugh." Mr. Green, who had listened to everyone with a teacher's patience, concluded, "Cookies are little pieces of happiness. They don't last long, but the memories do." Sarah felt a lump in her throat as she listened. She realized that the perfect batch of cookies wasn't just about flavor or texture, was about the moments shared, the hands that shaped the dough, the laughter that rose above the clatter of bowls and spoons. Baking, she thought, was a kind of storytelling, and each cookie was a chapter in the story of their community, with the stories shared. It was finally time to taste the new batch. The group passed plates around the table, taking a cookie from each tray. The ginger snaps were crisp at the edges, with just the right amount of spice. The double chocolate cookies were rich and decadent, the marmalade swirl adding a bright, unexpected note. The almond cardamom cookies were fragrant and tender, the honey lending a subtle sweetness. Sarah's oatmeal cookies, now with a hint of cinnamon and a sprinkle of sea salt, were hearty and satisfying. There was a moment of silence as everyone took their first bite, savoring the flavors and textures. Then, as if on cue, the room erupted. In smiles and happy sighs, "These are perfect," Mrs. Lynn declared, and the others nodded in agreement. Sarah felt a wave of contentment wash over her. She knew that perfection in baking was as much about the experience as the result. The cookies were delicious, yes, but more than that. They were a symbol of what they had created together, a sense of belonging, a memory to cherish, and a story to tell. As the evening deepened, the cookie club lingered around the table, sharing more stories, sipping tea, and nibbling on the last crumbs. The rain had all but stopped, leaving the world outside washed clean and quiet. Inside, the bakery glowed with warmth and friendship, the perfect ending to a perfect batch. Sarah glanced at the clock and realized it was nearly closing time. She stood and thanked everyone for coming, her voice full of gratitude. "Thank you all for being part of this. I think we've found something even better than the perfect cookie. We've found the perfect company." The group agreed, promising to return for the next cookie club meeting. As they gathered their things, Sarah wrapped up extra cookies for each person to take home, tying the packages with twine and a sprig of rosemary for luck. One by one, the friends stepped out into the quiet night, the air fresh and cool. Sarah watched them go, her heart full, the bakery still humming with the echoes of laughter and the scent of cookies lingering in the air. She turned off the lights, tidied the counters, and stood for a moment in the peaceful silence. The bakery, once again, was her own a place of warmth, memory, and endless possibility. And as Sarah locked the door and stepped out into the night, she knew that the story of the perfect batch of cookies would live on in every crumb, every smile, and every gathering yet to come. The quiet magic of closing time with the cookie club's laughter still echoing in her mind. Sarah began the familiar ritual of closing the bakery. The rain had stopped, leaving the world outside washed clean and glistening beneath the streetlights. Inside, the bakery was hushed, the warmth of the day lingering in the air and in the scent of cookies that seemed woven into the very walls. Sarah moved slowly, savoring the peace that always came at the end of a busy day. She gathered the empty mugs and plates from the big table, stacking them neatly and carrying them to the kitchen. The sink filled with warm, soapy water, and as she washed each dish, she let her thoughts wander back over the day's moments there. Flour-dusted laughter, the debates over chocolate and spice, the way the children's faces had lit up when the perfect batch emerged from the oven. She wiped down the counters, her cloth moving in gentle circles, and swept the floor, collecting the last traces of flour and sugar. She checked the ovens, making sure they were off, and covered the remaining cookies with clean cloths for tomorrow's early risers. The bakery felt different, now quieter, softer, as if it too was winding down for a well-earned rest. Sarah paused by the window, looking out at the sleepy street. The bakery's sign swung gently in the breeze, and the puddles on the cobblestones reflected the soft glow of the lamplight. She could see a few neighbors heading home, their arms linked, their laughter carrying faintly through the cool night air. Somewhere nearby, a cat slipped silently along a garden wall, pausing to glance in her direction before disappearing into the shadows. She lit a single candle on the counter, its flame flickering softly and casting long, gentle shadows across the bakery shelves. The light danced over the rows of jars and canisters, the baskets of bread, and the cooling racks lined with the last of the cookies. The bakery felt like a sanctuary, a place where the world's worries could be left at the door, if only for a little while. Sarah poured herself a cup of chamomile tea and sat at her favorite table by the window. She cradled the mug in her hands, feeling its warmth seep into her fingers. She let her gaze drift over the familiar sights, the old wooden chairs, the chalkboard where she wrote the day's specials, the faded photograph of her grandmother, smiling in her own flower-dusted kitchen. She thought about the stories she'd heard that evening, the memories and traditions her friends had shared. She thought about the way baking brought people together, how a simple cookie could carry the taste of childhood, the comfort of home, the joy of belonging. She realized that the perfect batch of cookies wasn't just about the right balance of ingredients, but about the love and laughter that went into every step as she sipped her tea. Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude. She was grateful for her little bakery, for the friends who filled it with warmth, for the chance to create something beautiful day after day. She was grateful for the quiet magic of closing time, when the world slowed down and she could savor the peace she had helped to create. She finished her tea and stood, stretching her arms above her head. She blew out the candle, watching the smoke curl upward and disappear. She turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of the street lamp shining through the window at the door. Sarah paused and looked back at the bakery, her heart full. She whispered a quiet goodnight to the room, to the memories made, and to the promise of another day. Stepping outside, she breathed in the cool, fresh air. The village was peaceful. The only sounds, the distant chirp of crickets and the gentle drip of water from the eaves. She walked home slowly, her steps light, her mind at ease. As she reached her cottage, Sarah glanced back at the bakery, its windows dark but still glowing with the memory of the day's joy. She knew that tomorrow would bring new faces, new stories, and new batches of cookies. She knew that the magic of baking would continue, one perfect batch at a time. And as she settled into bed, the scent of cookies and the warmth of friendship lingered, wrapping her in a gentle embrace. She drifted off, to sleep, dreaming of flower-dusted laughter, golden cookies, and the simple, perfect happiness of a day well spent. Part I, The Fog Rolls in the Morning, began with a hush. Outside, the village was wrapped in a thick blanket of fog, so dense that even the familiar shapes of houses and trees seemed to dissolve into soft, shifting shadows. Street lamps glowed like distant stars, their light diffused and dreamy. The world felt smaller, closer, and somehow more magical. Inside the rainy day bakery, golden lamplight spilled onto the dewy sidewalk, creating a warm oasis in the mist. Sarah arrived just as the clock in the square chimed 6, her boots muffled by the dampness underfoot. She paused for a moment at the door, taking in the hush of the fog and the way it softened every sound. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, greeted by the familiar scent of flour, sugar, and a hint of yesterday's cinnamon. The bakery was still and peaceful, the air cool and expectant. Sarah shrugged off her coat, hung it on its peg, and turned on the lights, one by one, until the whole shop glowed with gentle warmth as she moved through her morning routine, filling the kettle, setting out mugs, and checking the oven sirrer. Found herself thinking of childhood mornings just like this. On foggy days, her mother would keep her home from school for an extra hour, letting her linger in pajamas while the world outside remained a secret. They would make fudge together, stirring the bubbling pot and watching the chocolate swirl, the kitchen filling with the sweet promise of comfort. Sarah smiled at the memory. There was something about fudge that suited a foggy day, the way it was both simple and decadent, the way it melted on the tongue and seemed to warm you from the inside out. She decided, then and there, that today would be a day for fudge. She fetched her big copper pot from its place on the highest shelf. Feeling the cool heft of it in her hands, she gathered her ingredients: dark chocolate, heavy cream, sweet butter, and a jar of vanilla beans she'd been saving for a special occasion. She set everything out on the counter, arranging them with the care of a painter preparing a canvas. Outside, the fog pressed close to the windows, turning the world into a soft, grey cocoon. Sarah felt as if she and the bakery were the only things awake in the whole village. She measured sugar into the pot, the crystals catching the lamplight, and poured in the cream, watching it swirl and settle. She added the chocolate, breaking the bars into rough chunks, and dropped in a pinch of salt. The butter went in last, cut into neat cubes, each one sinking slowly into the mixture as she stirred. The ingredients began to come together, the chocolate melting and the sugar dissolving, the whole kitchen filling with a rich, intoxicating aroma. Sarah watched the mixture thicken and darken, swirling her spoon in slow, steady circles. She knew that fudge required patience. Too much heat and it would seize, too little and it would never set. She kept a careful eye on the temperature, waiting for the moment when the mixture pulled away from the sides of the pot in glossy ribbons. While she waited, she glanced out the window. The fog was even thicker now, muffling the sound of passing cars and making the bakery feel like a secret hideaway. A few early risers hurried past, their shapes barely visible, their footsteps swallowed by the mist. Sarah wondered if they, too, felt the magic of the morning, the sense that anything could happen when the world was hidden in fog. At last, the fudge was ready. Sarah poured the glossy mixture into a parchment-lined pan, smoothing it with a spatula. She sprinkled a little flaky sea salt on top, the crystals glinting like tiny stars. She set the pan on the counter to cool, resisting the urge to sneak a taste. Fudge, like fog, rewarded patience. With the first batch cooling, Sarah began to think of other flavors. She remembered a recipe for walnut fudge her grandmother had loved, and another for white chocolate with raspberries. She decided to make a trio: classic chocolate, walnut, and white chocolate raspberry, so there would be something for everyone who braved the fog to visit the bakery today. She moved through the kitchen with quiet joy, measuring and stirring, tasting and adjusting, the rhythm of baking as familiar to her as breathing. The bakery filled with the scents of melting chocolate, toasted nuts, and sweet cream. Outside, the fog lingered, turning the morning into a world of possibility. As the fudge cooled, Sarah set out fresh coffee and warm scones for the first customers. She placed the pans of fudge on the counter, their surfaces glossy and inviting, and cut a few pieces for sampling. She arranged them on a plate with care, knowing that the first taste was always the most important. The bakery was ready. The fog pressed against the windows, but inside everything was warm and bright. Sarah took a moment to savor the quiet, the anticipation, the sense of being wrapped in a world apart. Soon, the bell above the door would ring, and the bakery would fill with the laughter and stories of neighbors seeking comfort on a foggy day. But for now, Sarah stood in the hush, surrounded by the magic of Fudge and the promise of a day unlike any other. Asterisk, 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 Part 2. Inspiration for Fudge's Sarah waited for the first batch of fudge to cool. She found herself drawn to the window, her gaze lost in the shifting grey outside. The fog was so thick now that the world beyond the glass seemed to have vanished. The bakery felt like a secret island floating in a sea of mist. She wrapped her hands around a warm mug of coffee and let her mind drift back to her childhood. Foggy days had always felt magical to her, as if the world had been transformed into something softer and more mysterious. She remembered waking up to find the garden shrouded in white, the trees and hedges turned into ghostly shapes. On those mornings, her mother would declare it a fudge day, and the kitchen would become their haven. Sarah could almost hear her mother's voice, gentle and bright. Fog is fudge weather, darling. When the world is hidden, we make something sweet to remind us of what's good and warm inside. They would gather in the kitchen, Sarah perched on a stool, her feet swinging above the floor. Her mother would let her measure the sugar and break the chocolate into pieces, sneaking her a square or two as a treat. The two of them would watch the mixture bubble and swirl, the windows fogging up even more as the sweet scent filled the house. Sarah remembered the feeling of being cocoon safe, loved and surrounded by the promise of something delicious. When the fudge was finally ready and cut into squares, she and her mother would sit by the window, watching the fog drift past, savoring each bite as if it were a secret between them and the world. Those memories were a comfort, a reminder of how simple things could bring joy on the greyest days. Sarah smiled, feeling her mother's presence in the quiet kitchen. She realized that fudge wasn't just a treat, was a way of creating warmth and connection, of turning a mysterious, quiet day into something to be celebrated. Inspired, Sarah decided that today she would make not just one, but several kinds of fudge each. One, a tribute to the comfort and magic of foggy mornings. She thought of the flavors that had always brought her joy, the deep richness of classic chocolate, the earthy crunch of walnuts, the bright sweetness of raspberries, and perhaps something newer, swirl of salted caramel, or a hint of orange zest. She fetched her recipe book, its pages stained and well-loved, and flipped to the section marked Fudge Experiments. She jotted down ideas, letting her imagination wander. Maybe a dark chocolate fudge with toasted hazelnuts, or a creamy white chocolate version with dried cranberries and pistachios. She could even try a spicy cinnamon chili fudge, for those who liked a little heat with their sweetness. The possibilities made her smile. She knew that each batch would require patience, and care. Fudge was a temperamental treat, sensitive to temperature and timing, but she relished the challenge. There was something meditative about the process, the slow stirring, the careful watching, the transformation from simple ingredients into something rich and comforting. Sarah set to work, gathering her ingredients and lining up her pans. She weighed out chocolate, chopped nuts, zested oranges, and measured cream and butter. The kitchen became a symphony of scents and colors, each new batch adding its own note to the morning's melody. As she stirred the next pot of fudge, white chocolate base with raspberries and pistachios, Sarah felt the quiet joy of creation. The fog pressed close to the windows, but inside, the bakery was alive with warmth and possibility. She knew that soon the village would awaken, and neighbors would find their way through the mist. drawn by the promise of something sweet. Sarah glanced at the clock and realized it was nearly opening time. She arranged the first squares of fudge on a plate, their glossy tops catching the light. She poured herself another cup of coffee and took a deep breath, savoring the mingled scents of chocolate, cream, and caramel. Today, she thought, would be a day for comfort, for memories, and for sharing the simple magic of fudge on a foggy morning. And as the bell above the door jingled her first customer arriving, a shadowy figure emerging from the mist, Sarah felt ready to welcome them in, to offer a taste of warmth and sweetness, and to share the quiet wonder of a foggy day for fudge. Part 3. Gathering ingredients and early preparations. Sarah's first customer. Bundled up postman seeking a slice of warmth before his route. Left with a steaming mug of coffee and a generous square of classic chocolate fudge. The bakery's bell jingled again as he disappeared into the mist, his footsteps quickly swallowed by the hush outside. With the fudge display replenished and the bakery's door locked behind her, Sarah decided to make a quick trip to the market. Before the village fully woke, she slipped on her rain boots and wrapped herself in a thick woolen scarf, feeling the comforting weight of her shopping basket over her arm. Stepping outside, she was greeted by a world transformed. The fog was so dense that the familiar shapes of the village rooftops, lampposts, the old oak tree, were little more than smudges in a watercolor painting. The air was cool and damp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and earth. Every sound was softened, the distant bark of a dog, the gentle drip of water from eaves, the low murmur of a neighbor's radio somewhere behind a veil of mist. Sarah's boots made soft, muffled thuds on the cobblestones as she made her way down the lane. The market square, usually bustling, was a quiet dreamscape. A few early vendors were setting up their stalls, their voices low and cheerful as they arranged baskets of apples, jars of honey, and bunches of herbs. The fog made everyone move a little slower, as if savoring the stillness before the day's rush. At the greengrocer's stall, Sarah chose a carton of plump raspberries and a handful of glossy oranges, their scent bright and sharp even in the damp air. She greeted Mrs. Patel, who ran the dairy stand, and selected a bottle of thick cream and a pat of golden butter, both wrapped in waxed paper. From the nut cellar, she picked out walnuts, hazelnuts, and a small bag of pistachios, admiring the way their colors glowed in the muted light. The chocolatier's stall was her last stop. The owner, a kindly man with silver hair and a ready smile, greeted Sarah with a knowing nod. "Foggy day, is it? You'll be wanting the good stuff, then." He handed her bars of dark milk and white chocolate, each wrapped in crisp brown paper. Sarah tucked them into her basket, feeling the anticipation build. With her basket full, she made her way back to the bakery, the fog swirling around her like a friendly ghost. She took her time, enjoying the quiet and the way the village seemed to exist in its own secret world. By the time she reached the bakery, her cheeks were pink and her hair damp with mist. Inside, the bakery felt even cozier after her walk. Sarah set her basket on the counter and began unpacking her treasures. She lined up the chocolate bars, admiring the deep, glossy sheen of each one. She poured the cream into a heavy jug and set the butter out to soften. The nuts she spread on a baking tray, ready to be toasted for extra flavor. She zested the oranges, the bright curls releasing a burst of fragrance that mingled with the rich scent of chocolate. The kitchen became a symphony of sensory delights. The snap of chocolate breaking on the cutting board, the soft rustle of parchment paper, the creamy weight of butter in her hands. The raspberries, plump and ruby red, promised a tart sweetness that would brighten the white chocolate fudge. The pistachios, vivid green and earthy, would add a satisfying crunch. Sarah moved with practiced grace, her hands sure and steady. She measured and weighed, chopped and stirred, her movements as much a part of the recipe as the ingredients themselves. She lined her pans with parchment, smoothing the edges so the fudge would lift out cleanly. She set out her candy thermometer, knowing that the secret to perfect fudge was all in the timing. As she worked, she felt the bakery come alive around her. The fog pressed against the windows, turning the world outside into a soft blur, but inside, everything was vivid and real. The kitchen was warm, the air thick with the promise of sweetness, and Sarah felt a quiet joy settle over her. She placed the first batch of nuts in the oven to toast, listening to the gentle crackle as they warmed. She poured cream into a saucepan, watching as it shimmered and steamed. She broke chocolate into pieces, savoring the way it snapped beneath her knife. Every sense was engaged: sight, smell, touch, and soon taste. With her ingredients prepped and her pans lined, Sarah paused to take it all in. The bakery was ready, the kitchen a stage set for the day's magic. She knew that the fog would linger, that customers would come seeking comfort and warmth, and that her fudge would be waiting for them a sweet, rich promise on a mysterious, quiet day. And as she stirred the first pot of chocolate and cream, Sarah felt connected to every foggy morning she'd ever known, to her mother's kitchen, to the quiet streets of her village, and to the simple, enduring joy of making something wonderful for others to share. Part 4. The first batch. Classic chocolate fudge. Sarah stood in her warm, fragrant kitchen, the world outside still shrouded in fog. She took a deep breath and smiled. There was something special about making fudge, especially on a day like this. It was both art and science, a dance between patience and precision, and she was ready for the challenge. She began by measuring her ingredients with care. Into her heavy copper pot went 2 cups of sugar, each crystal catching the light as it poured. She added a generous splash of thick cream, the liquid swirling and mingling with the sugar, and then a pat of golden butter cut into neat cubes. Finally, she broke the dark chocolate into pieces, letting them fall into the pot with a satisfying clink. Sarah set the pot over a gentle flame, stirring slowly as the butter melted and the sugar began to dissolve. The aroma was heavenly rich chocolate, creamy and sweet, with a hint of caramel from the warming sugar. She watched as the mixture thickened, the chocolate melting into a glossy pool. She clipped her candy thermometer to the side of the pot, knowing that fudge was all about timing. Too cool, and it would never set. Too hot, and it would become grainy and hard. The sweet spot, she'd learned from her mother, was just at the softball stage, about 234 degrees Fahrenheit. She stirred steadily, never rushing, feeling the mixture grow heavier as the sugar cooked. The kitchen was quiet, except for the gentle bubbling of the fudge and the occasional creak of the old oven as it cooled from toasting nuts. Sarah watched the thermometer, her eyes darting between the swirling chocolate and the rising mercury. The fog pressed against the windows, making the bakery feel even more like a secret world. As the temperature climbed, Sarah remembered her mother's advice. Patience, darling. Fudge knows when you're in a hurry, and it will misbehave just to teach you a lesson. She smiled at the memory and kept stirring, resisting the urge to turn up the heat. The mixture bubbled and thickened, sending up clouds of chocolate-scented steam. When the thermometer finally reached the magic number, Sarah removed the pot from the stove and set it on a cool marble slab. Now came the most important part, beating the fudge. She added a splash of vanilla, the scent bright and floral, and began to stir with a sturdy wooden spoon. At first, the mixture was glossy and loose, but as she worked, it began to change. The shine faded, replaced by a soft, matte sheen. The fudge grew thick and heavy, resisting the spoon, and Sarah's arm ached with the effort. She knew she had to keep going to little beating, and the fudge would be sticky. Too much, and it would be crumbly. She watched for the moment when the mixture lost its gloss and started to hold its shape. A subtle transformation that signaled it was ready. With a practiced motion, Sarah scraped the fudge into her prepared pan, smoothing it with the back of her spoon. The surface was velvety and rich, the color deep and inviting. She tapped the pan gently on the counter to settle the mixture, then sprinkled a pinch of flaky sea salt over the top. Watching the crystals melt into the warm chocolate dot, she set the pan aside to cool, resisting the urge to cut into it too soon. Fudge, like fog, rewarded those who waited. As the pan rested, the kitchen filled with the scent of chocolate and vanilla, a promise of sweetness to come. Sarah cleaned her pot and spoon, her movements slow and content. She checked the fudge every few minutes, watching as it set at the edges, then in the center, until the whole pan was firm but still yielding to the touch. At last, the moment arrived. Sarah lifted the fudge from the pan, the parchment peeling away to reveal a perfect slab. She cut it into neat squares, each one smooth and glossy, the texture just right soft but not sticky, rich but not heavy. She popped a small piece into her mouth, closing her eyes as the chocolate melted on her tongue. It was everything she remembered from her childhood, creamy, sweet, and deeply comforting. The fog outside seemed to fade away, replaced by the warmth and light of the bakery. Sarah arranged the fudge on a plate, ready for the first customers of the day. She knew that some would come for the comfort of chocolate, others for the memory of foggy mornings past. All would find a little bit of magic in each bitter reminder that even on the greyest days, there was sweetness to be found. As she placed the plate in the display case, Sarah felt a quiet pride. The first batch of the day was perfect, a testament to patience, timing, and the enduring joy of making something with care. And as the bell above the door jingled, welcoming the next visitor from the mist, Sarah was ready to share the magic of fudge and the comfort of a cozy bakery on this foggy, unforgettable day. Part 5. The bakery opens. The first customers, the bell above the bakery door jingled, its cheerful sound cutting through the muffled quiet of the foggy morning. Sarah looked up from the counter, her hands still dusted with cocoa, and smiled as Mrs. Abernathy stepped inside, bundled in a thick wool coat and a scarf the color of ripe plums. "Oh, Sarah, it's a pea souper out there," Mrs. Abernathy exclaimed, stamping her boots on the mat and shaking off a few beads of mist. I could hardly see the bakery until I was right in front of it, but I followed my nose. Something smells absolutely divine. Sarah grinned, gesturing toward the display case where neat squares of glossy chocolate fudge waited on a blue and white plate. "You're just in time for a new batch, Mrs. Abernathy. Fudge for a foggy day, just like my mother used to make." Mrs. Abernathy's eyes lit up. "Fudge? Oh, that takes me back. My aunt used to make it on days like this, when the world felt small and mysterious." "May I, of course," Sarah replied, cutting a generous square and placing it on a small plate. She poured a mug of coffee, the steam curling in the chilly air, and set it beside the fudge, as Mrs. Abernathy settled at her favorite table by the window. The bell jingled again. Mr. Patel entered, his glasses fogged and his umbrella dripping. "Good morning, Sarah. I smelled chocolate halfway down the lane. Is it fudge day?" "It is," Sarah said, offering him a piece as well. "Come warm up. The fog's not lifting any time soon." Soon, more neighbors wandered in, drawn by the glow of the bakery and the irresistible scent of chocolate and coffee. Mrs. Lynn, cheeks rosy from the cold, arrived with her granddaughter Sophie, who pressed her nose to the glass display in delight. Mr. Green, the retired schoolteacher, came in for his morning tea and found himself enchanted by the sight of fudge, a rare treat, he declared. The bakery quickly filled with the gentle hum of conversation and the clatter of cups and plates. People shrugged off coats and scarves, grateful for the warmth and light. The windows fogged over from the contrast of cold air outside, and the cozy bustle within, turning the bakery into a little world apart. Sarah moved from table to table, offering samples of fudge and refilling mugs. She listened as her neighbors shared stories of foggy days past. Mrs. Abernathy recalled childhood walks to school, the fog so thick she could barely see her own mittens. We'd arrive at the classroom with our hair damp and our cheeks pink, and the teacher would have a pot of cocoa waiting. Fudge was a special treat if we'd behaved. Mr. Patel remembered growing up in Mumbai, where the monsoon mist would roll in off the sea. My mother would make a sweet called barfi, almost like fudge, but with cardamom and pistachio. Eating your fudge, Sarah, brings it all back. Mrs. Lynn smiled, recalling Lunar New Year mornings when the world outside was quiet and mysterious, and her family would gather in the kitchen to make red bean sweets. There's something about fog and sweets. They both make you feel safe and close. Sophie, swinging her legs beneath the table, declared, "This is the best chocolate ever." Her face was smudged with fudge, her eyes bright with happiness. Sarah felt her heart swell at the simple joy in the room. The fudge was a hit soft, rich, and just the right balance of sweet and deep chocolate. Each bite seemed to melt away the chill, replacing it with warmth and comfort. The bakery became a haven, a place where time slowed and the outside world faded into soft grey. Neighbors lingered over their treats, savoring every bite and every story. The fog pressed close to the windows, but inside, everything was golden and bright. As the morning wore on, Sarah realized her mother had been right. Fudge really was made for foggy days. It was more than a sweet, it was a memory, a comfort, a way to bring people together when the world felt mysterious and still. And as she looked around at the smiling faces, the empty plates, and the laughter that filled the bakery, Sarah knew she had chosen exactly the right treat for this magical, misty morning. Part 6. Experimentation, new flavors and techniques with the bakery now filled with warmth, laughter, and the soft glow of lamplight. Sarah felt a surge of inspiration. The classic chocolate fudge had been a resounding success, but the foggy days seemed to invite a spirit of adventure. She wanted to create something new flavors that would surprise and delight, and perhaps become new favorites for her neighbors. She glanced at her basket of market treasures: toasted walnuts, fresh raspberries, pistachios, oranges, and a small jar of sea salt caramel she'd been saving for just the right moment. The possibilities made her smile. "Who wants to help me invent some new fudge?" she called out. Hands shot up around the bakery. Emma and Max, who had just arrived with their mother, practically bounced out of their seats. Mrs. Lynn and Sophie exchanged excited glances, and even Mr. Green, who usually preferred to observe, offered to be an official taster. Sarah gathered everyone around a big wooden table, spreading out her ingredients and inviting suggestions. The group quickly settled on 3 new flavors to try: a nutty fudge with toasted walnuts and pecans, a salted caramel swirl, and a white chocolate fudge with fresh raspberries and pistachios. Nutty Fudge. Sarah started with the nutty fudge, melting dark chocolate and butter together in her copper pot, then stirring in cream and sugar. The aroma was deep and inviting, a promise of richness to come. As the mixture bubbled and thickened, Emma and Max helped measure out the toasted nuts, their small hands scattering pecans and walnuts into the glossy chocolate. When the fudge reached the perfect temperature, Sarah poured it into a pan and pressed more nuts on top, creating a mosaic of browns and golds. She let Emma sprinkle a touch of sea salt over the surface, the crystals catching the light. Salted caramel swirl. Next came the salted caramel fudge. Sarah melted white sugar in a saucepan. Watching it turn from pale gold to deep amber, she added butter and cream, the mixture hissing and bubbling as she stirred. The scent of caramel filled the bakery, sweet and slightly smoky. She poured the caramel into a bowl of melted chocolate fudge base, then used a knife to swirl the two together, creating ribbons of gold and brown. Mrs. Lynn, always precise, helped smooth the top and sprinkled a final flourish of sea salt, white chocolate, raspberry pistachio for the white chocolate raspberry fudge. Sarah melted white chocolate and butter, then stirred in sweetened condensed milk. The mixture was creamy and pale, almost glowing under the lights. Sophie gently folded in fresh raspberries, their juice swirling pink through the white chocolate, and scattered chopped pistachios on top. As the fudge cooled, the bakery buzzed with anticipation. The windows were still fogged, the world outside soft and grey, but inside everything was vivid and alive. The children pressed their faces to the pans, watching the fudge set, while the adults sipped coffee and swapped stories of kitchen triumphs and disasters, the joy and mishaps of every experiment went perfectly. The first batch of caramel fudge seized up when Sarah was distracted by a story from Mr. Green about his grandmother's disastrous attempt at fudge in a wood-fired oven. The caramel turned grainy, and the fudge wouldn't swirl. Sarah laughed, scraping the misshapen batch into a bowl. "We'll call this one rustic," she joked, offering spoons for everyone to taste. To her delight, the flavor was still wonderful, deeply caramelized, and just salty enough. The group agreed it was ugly but delicious, and the bowl was soon scraped clean. The white chocolate fudge, too, presented a challenge. The raspberries released more juice than expected, creating pink streaks and pockets of softness. Sophie was worried, but Mrs. Lynn reassured her. Sometimes the prettiest things are a little messy. When they cut the fudge into squares, the marbled effect was beautiful, and the tartness of the berries balanced the sweetness perfectly. Taste testing together, when all the pans had cooled and the fudge was sliced, Sarah arranged the new flavors on a platter and invited everyone to taste. The bakery became a chorus of delighted sighs and laughter as each person sampled the creations. The nutty fudge was rich and crunchy, the toasted nuts adding warmth and depth. The salted caramel swirl was a favorite, the sweet and salty flavors dancing together in each bite. The white chocolate raspberry pistachio was a revelation, bright, tangy, and just a little bit decadent. Neighbors who had stopped in for coffee found themselves swept up in the excitement, joining the impromptu tasting and offering their own feedback. A bit more salt in the caramel next time, suggested Mr. Patel. More nuts in the chocolate, Emma insisted. Sarah took notes, grateful for the honest opinions and the sense of shared adventure. She realized that the best part of experimenting wasn't just the new flavors, it was the laughter, the camaraderie, and the way everyone felt like part of something special as the afternoon wore on. The bakery glowed with the warmth of community and the joy of creation. The fog outside lingered, but inside, the world was bright and sweet, filled with the magic of fudge and the comfort of friends. And as Sarah looked around at the happy faces, she knew that these moments, the shared experiments, the laughter over mishaps, the discovery of new favorites, were the true heart of her bakery on this unforgettable foggy day. Part 7. A surprise visitor. Bakery was alive with laughter and the clinking of cups when the bell above the door chimed again. This time, the figure who entered was unfamiliar. Tall person in a long dark coat, a woolen scarf wrapped high, and a hat pulled low. They paused just inside, blinking as if adjusting to the golden light after the pale grey world outside. Sarah looked up from the counter, her hands still sticky with caramel. "Welcome in," she called, her voice warm. "You've found the right place to escape the fog." The visitor unwound their scarf, revealing a friendly, wind-reddened face. "Thank you," they said, voice tinged with relief. "I'm afraid I got a bit lost. The fog is thicker than I expected, and I must have wandered in circles for ages. But then I saw your fairy lights glowing through the mist like a beacon." Sarah smiled, recognizing the look of someone both weary and enchanted by the bakery's glow. "You're safe now. Please, sit wherever you like. Can I offer you some fudge and a cup of tea?" The guest nodded gratefully and settled by the window, where condensation blurred the view of the ghostly street. Sarah poured a steaming mug of black tea and placed a plate of fudge classic chocolate, salted caramel, and white chocolate raspberry before the newcomer. As the visitor sipped their tea, the bakery's regulars glanced over with curious, welcoming smiles. Mrs. Abernathy, never shy, leaned in from her nearby table. "You're not from around here, are you?" The guest shook their head. "No, I'm just passing through. I was meant to reach the next town by lunchtime, but the fog had other plans. I suppose I'm lucky to have ended up here instead." Mr. Patel, always eager for a story, asked, "What brings you out on a day like this?" The visitor smiled, a little sheepishly. "I'm a writer, actually. I travel from village to village, collecting stories and recipes for a book I'm working on, about the comfort of food on the greyest days. I've always been fascinated by how people come together when the weather keeps them inside." Eyes lit up. "Then you've come to the right place. Today is Fudge Day here, inspired by foggy mornings from my childhood. There's something about sweets and mist that just go together." The visitor took a bite of fudge, their expression softening with delight. "This is wonderful. My grandmother used to make fudge on foggy days, too. She'd say, when you can't see the world outside, you make something sweet to remind you of what's good inside. I haven't tasted fudge like this in years." The bakery grew quiet for a moment, everyone savoring the warmth of the story and the fudge. Mrs. Lynn chimed in, "Isn't it funny how fog brings out old memories? It's as if the world slows down and we're invited to remember." The visitor nodded. "That's what I love most about these days. The fog makes everything feel closer, more intimate. When I was a child, my cousins and I would sit by the kitchen window, watching the mist swirl, while our grandmother stirred a pot of fudge. We'd wait, barely able to contain ourselves, until she poured it into a pan and set it on the sill to cool. The first bite was always the best, soft, rich, and full of comfort. Sarah felt a kinship with the stranger, their story echoing her own. "Would you like to help with the next batch?" she asked. "We're experimenting with flavors today. There's always room for another pair of hands and another story." The visitor's face brightened. "I'd love that. And maybe I can share my grandmother's recipe, too." She always added a hint of orange and a dusting of cinnamon. The group welcomed the newcomer as one of their own, inviting them to the big wooden table. Soon, the bakery was alive with new ideas: orange cinnamon fudge, pistachio rose, and even a daring suggestion of chili chocolate. The visitor rolled up their sleeves, laughter joining the chorus as they chopped, stirred, and tasted alongside. The regulars, as the afternoon wore on, the bakery became a haven not just from the fog, but from loneliness and routine. Stories and recipes were traded like treasures, and the visitor's notebook quickly filled with new memories and flavors. When the next batch of fudge was ready, Sarah and the visitor cut it into squares and passed it around. The orange cinnamon fudge was a revelation, bright, warming, and just a little bit mysterious. Like the day itself, the visitor raised their mug in a toast. 2 foggy days, new friends, and the comfort of something sweet. And as the bakery glowed with laughter and the scent of fudge, Sarah knew that this was the true magic of her little shop, the way it brought people together, turning even the greyest day into a story worth remembering. Part 8. Community and comfort. As the afternoon wore on, the fog outside thickened, turning the village into a world of soft shadows and muffled sounds. But inside the rainy day bakery, time seemed to slow and expand, as if the mist itself had pressed pause on the outside world. The bakery had become a true refuge. The golden light from the lamps glowed against the fogged-up windows, and the air was filled with the mingled scents of chocolate, caramel, and citrus. The tables were crowded with neighbors, friends, and the surprise visitor. All gathered close, their voices low and warm as they shared stories and laughter over cups of tea and squares of fudge. Mrs. Abernathy, who had claimed her favorite seat by the window, leaned in to listen as Mr. Green recounted a tale from his teaching days, a story about a class of mischievous children who had once tried to make fudge in a science lab, resulting in a sticky, hilarious disaster. The whole table burst into laughter, and even the visitor, who had been quietly jotting notes in their weathered notebook, wiped away a tear of mirth. At the next table, Mrs. Lynn and Sophie were helping Emma and Max draw pictures of their dream fudge. Sophie's was shaped like a cat, with whiskers made of licorice, while Max's was a towering stack of chocolate, caramel, and peanut butter. Their mother smiled, grateful for a place where her children could be both creative and content. Sarah moved from table to table, topping off mugs, offering samples of the latest fudge experiments, and listening to the gentle ebb and flow of conversation. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was what she'd always dreamed her bakery would be, a place where people could linger, relax, and feel at home, no matter what the weather or the day. The visitor, now fully at ease, shared more stories from their travels: a bakery in the Scottish Highlands that made oat fudge on rainy days, a cafe in Paris where the owner swore by a secret blend of spices, a tiny shop in Italy where fudge was served with a shot of espresso, and a story about the town's founder. Each tale sparked new ideas, and soon the group was debating which flavor to try next and what memories they'd attach to it. The fog outside made the world feel small and safe, as if nothing existed beyond the bakery's glowing windows. People who might have hurried home on a clearer day lingered instead, savoring the rare chance to slow down and simply be together. The usual worries, errands, chores, the rush of daily life seemed to melt away, replaced by the comfort of shared company and sweet treats. As the afternoon light faded, Sarah lit a few candles on the tables, their flames flickering softly and casting gentle shadows on the walls. The bakery felt like a cocoon, wrapped in warmth and laughter, the fog outside only adding to the sense of intimacy. Neighbors, who had never spoken more than a polite hello, found themselves swapping stories about childhood winters, favorite family, recipes, and the best way to keep fudge from sticking to the pan. Old friends reminisced about foggy days from years past, when the bakery was new and Sarah was just learning the rhythms of her craft. Even those who came in alone found themselves drawn into the circle of conversation, welcomed with a smile and a plate of fudge. The visitor, notebook forgotten for the moment, was laughing along with the rest, their cheeks flushed with happiness and their eyes shining in the candlelight. Sarah watched it all with quiet joy. She knew that the world outside was still grey and uncertain, but within these walls there was warmth, connection, and the simple magic of community. The bakery was more than just a place to buy bread or sweets, it was a gathering place, a haven, a home. And as the fog pressed close and the laughter rose, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. She knew that these were the moments that mattered, the memories made, the friendships forged, and the comfort found on a foggy day for fudge. Part 9. Evening Reflections. As the afternoon melted into evening, the fog outside the bakery began to thin. Wisps of grey drifted past the windows, curling around the lamplight before dissolving into the dusk. The world beyond the glass gradually reappeared: rooftops, garden fences, and the old oak tree, its branches glistening with droplets. Inside, the warmth lingered. The bakery's golden glow seemed brighter against the deepening blue of the evening sky. Candles flickered on the tables, their soft flames mirrored in the windows. The air was still sweet with the scent of fudge chocolate, caramel, orange, and spice blended with the faint aroma of tea and coffee. The last customers lingered, reluctant to leave the cocoon of comfort they'd found within the bakery's walls. Mrs. Abernathy wrapped a few pieces of fudge in wax paper for her walk home. Mr. Green finished his story about the fudge disaster and promised to return with his own grandmother's recipe. Emma and Max, sleepy but happy, hugged Sarah before heading out with their mother, clutching their dream fudge drawings and a little parcel of treats at the big wooden table. The visitor closed their notebook, a smile lingering on their lips. "I've never seen a place quite like this," they said softly, their voice full of gratitude. "Thank you, Sarah. You've given me more than stories for my book. You've given me a memory I'll carry with me wherever I go." Sarah felt a gentle ache in her heart, the kind that comes from a day well spent and the knowledge that something special has happened. She looked around the bakery, at the empty mugs and crumb-dusted plates, at the faces of friends old and new. The fog had made the world feel small and safe, but it was the people inside who had filled it with warmth. She began her closing routine, moving quietly through the kitchen. She washed the last pans, wiped the counters, and swept up the stray bits of chocolate and nuts. As she worked, She reflected on the magic of the day, how a simple treat like fudge could bring people together, how stories and laughter could turn a grey day golden, how community could be built one cup of tea, one shared memory at a time. Before the visitor left, Sarah prepared a special box of fudge for their journey. She chose a little of everything: classic chocolate, nutty, salted caramel, white chocolate raspberry, and a few squares of the orange cinnamon experiment they'd created together. She wrapped each piece in waxed paper, arranging them in a sturdy tin. On top, she placed a sprig of rosemary for luck and a handwritten note: for foggy days and bright ones too. May you always find warmth and sweetness wherever you wander. Sarah and all your friends at the Rainy Day Bakery. She handed the box to the visitor with a smile: for the road, and for the next time you find yourself lost in the fog. The visitor's eyes shone with gratitude. Thank you, Sarah. I'll never forget today. As the last guests drifted out into the clearing evening, Sarah stood for a moment at the door, watching the world come back into focus. The fog was lifting, but inside her heart, the warmth of the day remained a gentle glow that would carry her through many mornings to come. She turned back to the bakery, the haven she had built and filled with care. She knew that tomorrow would bring new faces, new stories, and perhaps another foggy morning. But for now, she was content, wrapped in the quiet magic of community, comfort, and the simple joy of sharing something sweet. Part 10. Closing. The last light in the fog night had fully settled over the village, and though the fog had thinned, it still lingered in silvery ribbons along the quiet lanes and hedgerows. The world outside was hushed, painted in soft, blurred strokes of grey and blue, with only the occasional glimmer of a street lamp or the distant echo of footsteps on wet cobblestones. 137. Inside the Rainy Day Bakery, the last light glowed golden and steady. The warmth of the day's laughter and the scent of chocolate and caramel seemed woven into the very walls. Sarah moved quietly through her closing routine, her heart full and content. She stacked the chairs, wiped down the wooden tables, and gathered the last crumbs of fudge from the counter, savoring the peaceful hush that followed a day well spent. She paused by the window for a moment, gazing out into the misty night. The bakery's windows glowed softly, a beacon in the fog, much like the secret bakeries she'd once heard about in distant cities, places where, even in the quietest hours, the promise of something sweet and warm lingered for those who sought it out. 347. She thought of her new friend, the traveling writer, now on their way with a tin of fudge and a story to tell, and of all her neighbors, safe and snug in their homes, carrying with them the comfort and connection found within these walls. Sarah turned off the lights one by one, leaving only the gentle flicker of a candle on the counter. She locked the door, the old brass key turning with a familiar click, and stepped out into the cool, damp air. The fog wrapped around her like a soft blanket, and the bakery behind her glowed in the night, a small, steadfast island of light and warmth. She paused for a final moment, breathing in the sweet, earthy scent of the world after rain and fog. The village was utterly still, as if holding its breath, and Sarah felt a quiet gratitude settle over her. She knew that the story of this foggy day, the laughter, the fudge, the friendships would linger long after the mist had lifted. As she walked home, her footsteps muffled by the damp earth, Sarah carried with her the gentle magic of the day. The bakery, aglow in the misty night, stood as a promise that even when the world is quiet and hidden, there is always light, warmth, and sweetness to be found. And so, in the hush of the fog, the rainy day bakery's story drifted out into the night, soft, sweet,